Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And before I forget, a big thank you to all you guys who have been listening and supporting. This is episode 1 of season 4. Believe it or not, it kind of just snuck up, but here we are. And when this episode drops, we're, believe it or not, as well, just a few weeks away from the holidays. So if you're looking for a gift for your favorite playwright, actor, director, or producer, might I suggest a copy of Punk Monkey Productions' Play Noir Anthology, 41 film noir styled one-act plays written by playwrights from around the world in one compendium. Each of the 7 seasons are available independently if you don't want to go for the big book, but just know that there are 2 bonus plays in this as well that are not in any of the previous seasons, so keep that in mind. Also, keep in mind there is a film version of Speak No Evil, not to be confused with the latest release, that is based on the 2013 Play Noir play that we produced back in the day. So keep an eye out for that. All of this is available on Amazon. So head on over there and buy your favorite performing arts people a great book. My guest today is a playwright and filmmaker. Her short play, Glass Child, was featured in the 2024 10-Minute Play Festival at the Cannon Theater in Devens, Massachusetts, and will also be featured this month in the 2024 Soup to Nuts Play Festival in Pelham, New York. Her short play, Pomp and Circumstance, was read at the Equity Library Theater in Manhattan in October of 2024, and her full-length stage play, 1 + 1 is 2, was adapted into an Amazon Prime series in October 2020. She received her undergraduate degree from Boston University in 2018 and her MFA in writing for stage and screen from Lesley University in 2024. Without further ado, please welcome Sharisse Zeroonian. We made it happen. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
So, so much to unpack here, but I want to know, this is where my intrigue first comes into play right now, is how does one go from a full-length play to getting an Amazon Prime series? It's not a movie. No. So you've got a full-length play, but then it's developed into a series.
Yeah, that was a crazy journey. So the way it started was, so it started out, funny enough, it's actually started its first life as a novel. So when I was like 16, I started writing it as a novel, and I realized that the dialogue came pretty easy to me, but the writing everything else, like the characters' descriptions and the settings and the inner monologue, I've gotten way better as a fiction writer, and I've had a lot of fiction published as I got older. So that skill, I acquired it over time. But when I was 16, I wasn't really quite there yet. So I thought, you know what, I'm in high school and I do plays all the time. And I thought, what if I just made this into a play like the ones we do at school? So I did that, and it's a super long play. It's like I guess like almost like Fiddler on the Roof, but like much worse. It's because it's super, super long. But it's and I had that self-published, and I went on a thing where like I went to schools for a little bit and I talked about it and stuff like that. And that was when I was 19. That was 10 years ago.
And this is the play, right? This is the play.
Yes.
Okay.
This is the stage play version. And I only had like readings done of a couple scenes, like never the whole thing. And I said, I want to make it into a movie. So I made it into a movie and I adapted it. And of course, there's a lot I had to change, and I had to expound on more of the storylines and stuff to make it more for a film format. And I kind of shopped it around, and I hadn't really, I'd had interest from some companies, but they weren't really able to produce, and I couldn't produce. And that was before I really started filmmaking. I do make my own films and stuff. I didn't really start doing that until I was 21. Is when I really seriously got into it. And I realized, you know what, there's just so much to this as a movie. And there are so many elaborate storylines that I wanted. I wanted a lot of the backstory for the characters. But it just seemed like, you know, it was a lot to put in a feature. And if I foolishly at the time thought that making a series would be easier, than making a movie. I don't know, but I decided, why don't I just kind of break it up, and I adapted it to take place. The original stage play takes place in 1968, and then there's like later a future scene in 1972, and those dates are kind of important to the play. I'll say why, but it's just really expensive to shoot period stuff all the time because you got to get old clothes and old cars and this. So I said, okay, why don't we adapt it so it takes place in the modern day, but there are flashbacks to the past, and that's what I did. I started adapting it in 2018, and that's when the pilot is set, when the character is an elderly woman. She was 28 in the first one, now she's 78. And her husband and her grown daughter are in the process of writing a book about her life as an activist, primarily, but it also kind of goes into her life as a mom, a wife, a friend. But, like all of us, she's human, and she made a lot of choices that maybe weren't great. And so basically it's the struggle of going back into the past and finding, these things that happened, and then deciding, well, what to put in the book, what to leave out of it. Like, how does history look upon this person? And do you want to show all the good, or do you want to show some of the bad? Like, how does what we've done make us who we are, and the legacies? And there's a lot about generational trauma in there, and how you're like doomed to turn into your parents. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's not just a political play, because she was a disability rights activist. That was her thing. But it's less about that and more about like the personal things that happen to us, like in our families. And so it just turned out that way. And we're shooting it today, in fact.
Nice. Well, congrats. Well, isn't showing some of the good and some of the bad all about what a character arc is about?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think though, for an activist, it's especially important to show some of the bad, because we think that like, oh, they're always benevolent and they always want to do things for the good of other people. And she does. She is a benevolent character, but we see later on, it's very clear in the stage play. And it's going to be clear in this one too, once we get to episode 5, which is the finale, where one of the main, incentives that she has for doing this is that she wants to avenge her childhood for the way that she was treated growing up with a disability. And it gets to the point where she becomes so obsessed with the cause that she starts like neglecting the people in her life who don't have disabilities, like people in her family and people. And so it's kind of a look at what happens when someone gets overzealous and starts to focus on that dream above all else. And also someone who maybe isn't an activist, who isn't always sympathetic, because we tend to associate politicians and activism and people who fight for a cause with, automatically being good and being perfect, when that's not this case.
So let's talk about the evolution of this play. You said you started in high school, and I don't know what your background then was as far as playwriting goes. You said you acted, but you hadn't. But then we go into your undergraduate, then we go to your MFA. So obviously, this is a project that you've been working on over time. So what changed?
I mean,
from where it started and where it ended. What did you learn? What did you apply?
Man.
What did you realize? Oh, I get that maybe this isn't quite working, and this is why it's not working, because I just, you know what I mean? What changed with your education, if anything? Maybe nothing did.
That's a really big question. I'd say if you're asking like what my education, if you're asking about like undergrad through grad, like how it changed me as a playwright, or like as a writer in general, or for
how it changed this particular play first. We'll get into that part. I do want to hear that, but obviously you started this in high school.
Yeah.
And you don't have to share how long ago that was, but again, like I don't know what your experience was when you first started writing it. You said you had the dialogue. It was going to be a novel. You take the novel aspect out and you make it a stage play. And I don't know what that experience is as far as what you have and how it evolved because when did you finish? When did you start it? And when did you find you were done, that it was worth self-publishing? And I want to get into that as well as we.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So when I was 16, I don't mind sharing, that was in 16 going on 17, like the song, when it was in
I was just going to say the same thing.
Yes, it was it was in 2012, like the end of my sophomore year. And I started doing this, and I don't know, it's sort of, and some of the
When did you complete it? When did you complete it on that note?
2014. So it took 2 years.
Okay.
If I wasn't in school, it would have been much quicker. But life happens. The SATs happen, college acceptance happens, and it's getting your driver's license, all that. So it took 2 years. I remember I used to sit in the library in my high school and just wait for my mom or dad to pick me up and just type away. And I was, I was really into it for a bit, and I think I realized I was done when I had, I think when I'd really fleshed out Marielle, the main character. I mean, when I'd really fleshed out her, one thing they talk about in playwriting, like we talked about a lot in school, is what does the character want? And what does the character want externally? Like what's something tangible they can get? And then their internal drives, like what's going for them. And I think once I had figured both of those out, I kind of knew that I'd gotten the bulk of it done. Like, what does she want externally? Well, she wants to, fight for education for disabled kids. She wants certain legislation to get passed, and she wants her grassroots movement to gain the recognition it deserves. And what does she want internally? Well, she wants to finally be seen and heard and taken seriously. And she wants to finally, like I said, avenge some of the stuff that happened to her when she was discriminated against. And I guess I got that done. They started fleshing her out more like as a mom, right? Because that's a big part. She had her daughter who was then 7 years old, and then, grew in the series to be like 55 years old or whatever it was. She was, I wanted to show that like she loves her daughter, but she also, there's a point where she says to her husband, like when they're alone together, she finally expresses her frustration because her daughter doesn't have a learning disability like she does, and says like, I can't, don't you know, I know how bright she is. And like, that's why I know how smart and capable she is. That's why why do you think I can't stand her? And like she says, it's kind of something she says in anger. She doesn't mean it, but she just says, whenever I watched her read a book, because she's dyslexic, but they couldn't diagnose her the way they did today. Sure. She had to drop out of school and all that. She's like, when I watch her read a book, my daughter read a book so fluently, and I want to jump up. Part of me wants to jump up for joy and say, not her, not her. Like, I'm so glad, but I'm stuck when I want to do that. I can't do it. And, and I wanted to flesh that part out of her more, but I also wanted to, really flesh out also her as a friend. Her friend, she has one very close friend with an autistic son, again, undiagnosed. They just wanted to put him in a home, but they didn't do that. And her, it kind of gets to a point where like she has a falling out with her friend because she kind of stabs her friend in the back and says, oh, my friend wasn't helping me enough. She's not pulling her weight in the group. And really her friend was just, taking care of her other son, who, doesn't have a disability. Like he was sick, so she missed a couple of rallies or meetings or whatever. Sure. And they have a fight about that. And that's where the title comes from. 1 + 1 is 2, because that friend says to her, how many kids do I have? I have 2. 1 + 1 is 2, meaning like you can't just focus on one group. Right. I have, there's other people out there besides you and outside of your own, what your tunnel vision is. And, I really wanted to flesh that. And I think that brings me to my other point. When I knew this was ready to be done was when I thought I had approached that message thoughtfully, but in a way that wasn't meant to like offend people. It did end up inevitably offending a few people, and I can't do anything about that. But it was more, I wanted to start a conversation about it rather than have it be just purely incendiary. So I think when I had figured out all those nuances in the characters and in the theme, and when I kind of wrapped it up at the end ends in 1972 when Massachusetts legislation chapter 766 is passed. And that, for people who don't know, that's kind of like kind of like the grandpa for some of the special education legislation we have today. And the Americans with Disabilities Act, it was one of the predecessors, and that's Chapter 766 is a special education law. And when it's passed, and it kind of ends with like a bunch of kids, disabled and non-disabled, on a playground together, and they're like cutting a ribbon and stuff like that. And so when I had wrapped it up, kind of, that's how I knew it was done.
Yeah. California has something similar.
Yes, they do.
We have what's called the final rule, and that's integration of individuals with disabilities, where they have to be integrated into the public and the community. But story for another time. You said that you offended people. Where did, and again, I don't want to. It's about playwriting, but I'm just curious where that came into play, and then I want to.
Yeah, I think people
back
were.
To a couple of things I have to ask.
Yeah, I think people were offended because because the message because the message was kind of saying, hey, you can't just, it kind of turned the whole thing on its head when like a person with a disability is now kind of trying to attack the people in her life or like neglect them who don't have it just because she's bitter about the way she was treated. Sure. And I think we're not really used to seeing people who have been historically marginalized, maybe not always, I don't want to say put on a pedestal, but maybe, not shown as being fully human. I think when you don't show the bad in people, no matter what group they come from, it kind of takes away some of the humanity. So I think that kind of had to do with it. But I think when people understood what I was doing, I think they kind of calmed down a little bit.
Did that get, how much of that was the character versus the playwright? Do they understand that it's the character doing this, not Sharisse as a playwright? You know what I mean? They're attacking you for what the character is doing. There's a separation. I don't know if anybody realizes that,
Right. No,
I think the audience goes.
I think they realized it later. And, the people, we've all matured. Like I said, I was 19 when this got published, and the people who were offended were also like 19 or 20. But I think with like age, we've all come to realize, and that's such a precarious age. Like when you're just starting college and you think you can change the world, and like it's like the Bob Dylan song when he says, oh my God, I'm thinking of the song My Back Pages, which I love. And there's a specific line where he says something like, abstract threats, too noble to neglect, deceive me into thinking I had something to protect. So it's kind of when like you see all the injustice happening around you and you truly have good in your heart, but sometimes you're too young to like always maybe see the nuances in situations. And it's kind of like when he says, but I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. Because now I realize maybe back then I may have not been thinking as clearly. So that was kind of that. I think people knew, and some of the people who knew me personally, like I have a sibling with a disability. That's kind of like where this comes from. And I can't deny that some of that was not my own feelings about it. Because, when you grow up like that, sometimes you, even in the best of families and circumstances, people still have experiences where they feel like left out or like the siblings' needs were taking precedence, and you can still hold some of that in your heart. So no, I can't deny that some of the characters' actions came from that place and me expressing feelings I had about that place. But I think once people thought about it and they took my story into account, they're like, oh yeah, now that I'm older and I'm less hot-headed, I kind of understand why she'd feel that way.
Well, let's go back a little bit, because I'm kind of curious. You said you self-published. Mm-hmm. So what, did you shop it around first, or did you just like pull the trigger and said, I'm just gonna, there's reasons behind it, shopping it around. Sometimes it takes 6 months to a year before you get a response, which is, sometimes can be a no, where it's just like, I'm a big advocate of like pulling the trigger on for yourself and just saying, avoid the gatekeepers and just, get it out there, rather than waiting for somebody else and taking the time, but that's where I'm coming from. So did you shop it around first, or did you just go right with the self-publication?
to be honest, I didn't really know what to do at that age. Like now that I'm older and I've been through playwriting programs, I know more about like Samuel French and stuff like
Sure.
that. But that was like nothing to me when
Right.
I was that young. And so I thought, you know, it may be easy to, I guess part of me feared rejection and part of me thought like, oh, it's going to take too long. I don't have
Right.
the most patience in the world. And people have gone on me about that. Like, you got to be
Sure.
more patient. But I'm like, if I had been patient, I would have nothing right now. You know, if I had listened to people who said you're not ready, I would have nothing. And I'm not saying like, oh my God, I have the best resume or whatever. I really don't. But, you know, I would have nothing at all if I
Right.
hadn't pulled the trigger on myself, like you said. So yeah, that's why I went that route. And honestly, and even with Amazon, by the way, people are always like, how did you strike a deal with Amazon? I'm like, no, the process of getting something on there is very much like self-publishing a book.
I'll be honest with you. That's Play Noir Anthology was the exact same way. Everything that, you know, everything that I've produced, I've just gone through self-publishing, you know, and done it myself. And I don't think people realize how accessible it is. And that's why I wanted to kind of
and there's a huge
talk about that
stigma.
process.
There's a huge stigma against it still. Like, oh my God, like only, you know, books that are bad get self-published. And like, that's not true. Like, I will admit though, the first couple of editions had like a few typos in them, but that happens.
I got to fix on mine as far as, you know, like format goes and stuff like that. But that's the thing. It's like, again, it's avoiding the gatekeepers. The gatekeepers are, for the most part, in a way, null and void. Not to mention that you lose a good chunk of change. I think what some of the publishers take 70%, if I'm not mistaken. You know.
Yeah, I mean, you still get ripped off in it with self-publishing in a way. Like Amazon, I get paid like $1 when someone watches the show, and it's like, okay, you know, and it's not a lot of people watch it, but it's still better than like, you know, being in development hell, as they call it, when like you submit a script and then someone says, oh my God, yeah, here's $10,000, we're gonna make it, and they just don't, and it sits on a shelf for 10 years. And it's like, if someone asked me, would you rather have $10,000 or your film? Like, I'd rather have my film. So
yeah, we talk about that as far as well, like certain things when it comes to festivals, play festivals and stuff like that. Would you rather have a 2-week production, or would you rather have the $500 award money?
Yeah.
You know, the $500 doesn't get you recognition. Having your play produced is I think much more warranted. After this whole thing's over, I do want to throw a suggestion at you as far as promotional stuff goes, because that might help in the series. When you finished whether first edition, second edition, you said that you started shopping around to schools and you started talking about it. Talk about that. What the catalyst for that was in that experience of like going to schools, or, you know, like you completed it, you got your copies, then what'd you do next?
Yeah, so I started with my own school, my own alma mater from high school at the time. I went to a school where there were a lot of, it wasn't a special school per se, but it ended up being like it was kind of like a de facto special school in a way, because a lot of
kids. When you say special school, what does that mean?
Sure, there are a lot of kids there who had like learning disabilities or mental health problems, which is why I fit right in as somebody with mental health problems. But so I thought that population would be good for the play. And so I also wrote it with schools in mind, because I remember when I was in high school, like everybody had to participate in an after school activity. And for me, that was mostly drama, because I suck at sports. You don't want to see me. I had a brief stint as a basketball player in elementary school. It was terrible. But because everybody had to participate, there's like 20 kids in the ensemble, and like there's a few leads and stuff like that. So I thought, okay, I'll write it so that there's an opportunity for like, you know, kids who would play, like people who would play parents and kids and stuff like that, you know, for the kids who had like one line or something like that. I thought I would write it. That's why it has such a huge cast. And that's probably why
How many? How many characters?
How many like main characters? Let's see. It's Marielle, Stephen, Molly, Kate, Teddy. I want to say there's maybe like 8 or 9 like characters who have support. And then there's like, you know, a school of any size could choose to have like anywhere from 5 to 10 people playing like random background, like students at the school or whatever. So I wrote it with schools in mind. And I went to, I gave a copy to my librarian, and I did actually dedicated the play to her because she helped me out with writing it a lot. And she was like one of my, like I used to go to school, like after school, and I would hang out and like chat with her and stuff like that. And she was, because she was also around, she's also an adult who like witnessed a lot of this stuff. Like I could have asked my own family, but the problem was they weren't like, I come from a family of immigrants, so like they weren't in the country to like witness these changes happening, so it wouldn't have been much to ask them. So I asked, and neither was my librarian. She's Canadian, but still it's a little closer to America than what Iran was in the 60s. So but she was kind of able to help with that. And so I gave a copy to her, to the school, and we had a thing called senior presentations in my school where like all the seniors had to present about something in order to graduate, and mine was this play. So I had a reading done of it, of like a couple scenes with like my friends playing the roles and stuff like that. And I also I had a friend, someone who I used to be friends with. He also was going to a school in Massachusetts that was kind of similar to mine in a way, but there were kids there with like more severe disabilities in the program. So he had me go talk to the kids there about writing the book and stuff like that. So I did that. I had a children's book that I also self-published around the same time. And I also went back to that school and did a reading of it. But I went to my local library and I did a whole thing about writing for like, it was like a special drop-in thing where I had kids who were like 12, 13 come by and they wanted to learn how to write a play. So I like talked to them about what I did. Mm-hmm. So I kind of went at it, it's always a good marketing strategy to go where the people who, if the subject of the play or the book or movie or what have you is close to their heart or impacts them somehow, it's good to seek out those specific places and go. So
how many other schools did you go to besides your own?
Like maybe 2 or 3. I actually went to my elementary school they had a book fair, so I was signing copies there. I went there. I went to like my town. They had an event, and I was like selling copies there. And so yeah.
How did you make those contacts? What was the process? Did you just call them up? Did you walk in? Since it was self-published, did you print a bunch of copies and take them with you? And then I'm assuming that you sold them.
Yeah, I ordered a bunch of copies. One of the things about self-publishing is you got to order your own books.
Yeah.
But I sold them. I just kind of contacted like places that were taking vendors with like, hey, you want this? And also consignment stores. Like I would I do have I'm sure no one's bought it. I do have a copy in like a few bookstores around Cambridge and Boston. I also have.
And are those independent places, or did you like, hey, like Barnes and Noble? Hey, I did this, and so.
Not Barnes and Noble. This is like indie bookstores. Although I think my book is available on the Barnes and Noble site. Like I've randomly Googled it, and it's been available on random sites. But.
Yeah, I Barnes and Noble for me, and Walmart as well for that. But and I don't know if you've taken the leap, but it's like it's on your website. Can I come over and like I've wanted to do a table read like of a couple that because they're all short plays. So I was like, can I bring some actors in? It's on your website now. You don't have any in the brick and mortar stores, but can I? And maybe that's where I come into play as well. Like you did is like you're kind of afraid of rejection if you go in and say, hey, can I do this? And you just don't want to be turned away and walk out embarrassed and redder than I am already today. Okay, interesting. All right, and then okay, all right, that's good. I'm just curious because again, like anybody that does go that route, that to just go and find opportunities, which I think is great. I think that a lot of playwrights need to do that, as well, and just kind of create their own opportunities. You mentioned something early on in this regard, or regarding this play, as far as I don't know if it wasn't layers, but you said the relationships, like the multiple relationships and different things that were connections, if you will. I'm trying to remember the exact way you phrased it.
Yeah, I phrased it kind of like unpacking like generational trauma and some of the things like maybe your parents did with you, you might unconsciously end up doing with your own kids, which happens. There are like a few different families that get followed in the series.
But you kind of mentioned the intertwining and things like that. So I'm curious how that looks on the page. How did you track it? Did you outline and say, okay, this is happening here. I got to make this connection here. This is going to go over here.
Right.
What's that like when you get into complex systems, if you will, within a play? How do you keep track of things, especially like to ensure that everything makes sense, that all plot points and storylines aren't lost? So it sounds like you have a very complex story, and I'm just curious how you kept track.
Sure. So, well, some of them, I mean, do come from things that happen in real life. So there's some of it writes itself, but of course you got to keep it organized because real life is messy and art has to be more contained sometimes. So what I'll do is I'll get a piece of paper and I'll write, I will write like a literal outline like you would for writing an essay when you were in high school or college or something. And I'll say like, what happens between, I don't know, Marielle and Kate, two characters. And I'll put like a little arrow and I'll say, like they fight, and then another arrow. Why do they fight? Because Marielle wants this, because Kate wants that. Okay, what is the driving force here? Like I'll ask myself questions. I'll do like a little Q&A with myself, and I'll write them as arrows and bullet points, and I'll refer back to it just so I remember what I'm doing. Right. I also sometimes will I'll open up a Word doc or like a Google draft email or something like that, and then I will write out exactly what is supposed to happen so I can follow it. And it I definitely have to do that to make sure, and looking for patterns too is essential. Like, because, for example, was another character like, oh, because Brian's mom did this. Now Brian himself does this because he saw his mom do this or something like that. So just keeping track, looking for patterns, and literally writing out what's going to happen almost like until it looks like a PowerPoint presentation, pretty much.
Sure. Do you know how many characters you are starting out with, or do you just let it evolve and just like, it's time for another person to come in? Or is it really so structured prior to sitting down to write?
You know what? No, that's a good question. I mean, I feel like it comes to me. I feel like I usually have everything I write. It like starts with a feeling, oddly. I don't know. Like I will write, it starts with a feeling, and I will write that feeling from like, if it were my point of view, and then like another person will start to take shape within me, and I'll like give that person a name or something. And then when that person starts from within me starts talking about their life and the things they've experienced, like, oh, my mom, oh, my dad or something. Okay. Then the mom and the dad comes from that. So like it kind of gestates from there. And it's almost like, I guess like Ernest Hemingway said, like, write one true thing a day. So I think I kind of go for that approach, something that I was really feeling. And
what does that mean exactly? Write one truth a day.
It means like, it's like a way to get, if you're having trouble getting stuck with writing, like if you're sitting, I think the way I interpret it is like, if you're sitting down, you're trying hard to fabricate a storyline and it's not coming to you, just write something that you're really feeling in that moment, or something that really, that about life, and just write that down. Something will come from that. That's kind of what I do.
A prompt of sorts.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Like a prompt. So I think I kind of go with that, or I start with dialogue. Okay. People say like, what do you start with first? I start with dialogue always. So a little quote, a random quote that's in my head, or something I heard a stranger say walking on the sidewalk, or something, even like an inner thought that's been bubbling in my mind. I'll write it down no matter how ridiculous it is. Sure. And then I'll imagine, well, who is saying this? And that's when the person comes through, and I might imagine like if it's a man or a woman. And then from there I'll go, well, how old are they? What's their story? And then it kind of snowballs from there. Okay. So
you going back a little bit, you were talking about, it's this character comes in and they, and then you said you come up with a name. What influences the names of your character? or characters, I should say?
That's a really good question. It's almost like, I feel like it's almost like I almost take it as seriously as like naming a baby or something.
Okay.
Like I don't have any babies, but it's
Is,
like
is it based on behavior? Is it based on however you envision them as far as
sometimes it is. I definitely take age and time period into account. Like I'm not gonna, in the 60s, I'm not gonna name a character Jaden or Caden or
Apple?
Braylon or Apple or
Sure.
Blue Ivy, nothing like that. No shame, no shade to Beyonce, but like I'll definitely take that into account. I will take behavior. Like I had another play I wrote for school. It was about 4 teachers in a lockdown, kind of like John Paul Sartre, like No Exit, but more of like a dark comedy type of way. And they're in a lockdown during like a school shooting threat. And I had a character named Dante, for example. He's a teacher, but he's an English teacher who's very mercurial, and he picks the most fights with people in the group. Or I pick, a name like what was the other character I had? And I had another character in that called, there's another character who's kind of like a foil to that character. He's kind of not as uptight. He was very silly, almost like Roman Roy from Succession type. And I named him Jude because he was like a younger guy, but almost like a cooler sort of name, kind of like a cool, chill dude. So personality will influence it. Age, definitely.
I kind of expected you to say that his name was Foil.
Foil. That would be a cool name. Foyle, Foil.
There you go.
Ethnicity will play a part in it too.
Okay,
sometimes
sure.
I write a lot. Sometimes I write stuff for my Armenian background. I will sometimes give a character an Armenian name or something like that. Though sometimes I'll go at like ethnicity neutral names if the character was like born in the country. I would say the biggest influence is either like time period or behavior, most definitely. And if a character is not particularly and I also go with like, sometimes I even start with last names and go at like what would go well with the last name. And I found 1 + 1 = 2 had a lot of alliterative names by accident. I noticed like Marielle Morin and then her daughter Molly Morin. And I was like, oh my God, M&Ms. But yes,
Where do you originate your last names? Where do they come from?
Well, like I said, if I'm writing from like my own community's point of view, it'll come from that.
Sure.
But sometimes if it's not, like I think for Marielle Morin, I think I was thinking, well, Morin is her husband's name, but I was thinking, like Boston Irish,
okay,
like that, or something like that.
I'm just curious.
Will have to do with it
because surnames always get to me when I write, and it's goofy, and I probably overthink it, but everything has to be symbolic. I don't know why. It's
not always for me, but sometimes it is. It kind of has to do with, but And sometimes if I want, like for play, it's different for film because you have one cast for everything.
Sure.
But like if a play is, if I want to specify that like race or ethnicity, some of my things are like racially open or ethnically open.
Sure.
So I don't give a certain ethnicity sometimes because I want like to create opportunities for all people to play the role.
Right. Sure. Well, let's go back to your evolution of as far as writing a play in high school without education, for lack of a better word. Obviously, you're educated. That's not what I mean, but not going through training, if you will. So what? From where you started to where you are now, what has changed? What did you learn?
I think what I've learned is when I was much younger, I think I was writing more from like an actor's perspective and like the plays that I had done in school. That's where my education came from, really. Like I would look for like, the climax of what was happening in those plots and then how those ended and how those began. And I would kind of use those to get a rhythm and a feel of how I thought a play should be. And then I think I was more strict back then about sticking to that. And then as I got older, especially with where film came into play, and I think this is something I'm still learning as a playwright to not feel as limited by stage. As I feel like a little more free with screen, like you can do a lot more. But I think I'm feeling less that way now. I think I'm now some of the influences of my friends who are in the playwriting and screen. Because my thing is writing for stage and screen. You had to do both when you were there.
Right, sure.
but I feel more, I think learning from the people who are primarily playwrights are telling me and teaching me that you don't, some of the stuff that is possible with film can also be possible on a stage. And I was more resistant to that idea before, but I definitely see it and feel it more now. And I think something that I think I definitely have a better set. Like, one thing that my teachers tried to steer me towards is not focusing so much on internal stakes and drives, and focusing, making the external goals more clear, and having the external goals be things that are more, that the audience can see and feel more. And I think I kind of get that. And also not having so much of the play be in the past. Like, one
Right.
thing, I had a teacher really get on me a lot about expository dialogue, like not saying, remember when so much. And I thought back to like when Tony Soprano says in one of the, like, in the first, I think it's the first season or something, he says like, remember when is the lowest form of conversation. And I didn't understand what that meant when I was younger, but now I totally get it, because if everything is taking play, if the most important things that are driving your character happen in the past and they just keep talking about it, hey, remember when this happened when I was little, it doesn't translate as well on screen. And maybe in film it does, because you have the opportunity for flashbacks. But on stage,
Going back to the whole show don't tell.
Yeah, everything, exactly. And everything has to be happening now. So I think I learned to do that better. And my play Glass Child, I owe the success of that to that same teacher who was like, you can't just have the character be hung up on things that happened in their childhood. Whatever that is, that needs to be translating right now. And he showed me kind of how to do that. And I had another teacher who kind of walked me through. She did an exercise with me that really helped when she said, imagine, she gave me, we were on Zoom, and like, she showed me an apple. She's like, imagine you're in the middle of the woods and you've eaten your last granola bar and you have nothing to eat, and you see this apple on a tree, and there are obstacles that keep you from getting to that apple, but your main goal is to get that apple, and how are you going to get there? And I said, okay, well, I would like climb the tree. Okay, but like there's a fence. Well, I'll climb the fence. Okay, but maybe like, there's like nails in the fence or something like that. Okay, and I had to keep coming up with elaborate ways. But in the end, my character's goal was to get to what they wanted, no matter what. And that really helped me. And it's funny, I also think of my own life in terms like that. Like, when there's something that I can't get and that's something I really, really need, is like, what am I going to do to get that? So it just showed me how life and playwriting can really, how they're not really as far away as I used to think they were. I think I'm definitely will always be team film in my heart, but I think I've come around more to playwriting. And honestly, I may lean more towards that in the future, because it's, from what I've seen, it's less expensive than making.
100%. Well, I'll give you the other bonus to that as well. Mm-hmm. You can recoup your investment.
Sure.
You're going to, you sell tickets, so you can at least hopefully break even, if not make a profit. Mm-hmm. But even still, it's like if you pay $5 and you still make $2 or $3, mm-hmm. you still got something to show for it. Exactly. I remember was doing a season of Play Noir, mm-hmm. and one of the actors was like, "Why do you do this?" And I was like, I don't know. And I didn't at the time. It caught me off guard. I'm like, why do I do this? And we were in rehearsals at the time. Mm-hmm. And then I think we were in tech, or maybe the show was running. I'm like, in just the experience was just like, this is why I do it. Because you have that memory.
Oh, absolutely.
Just the bonding, the camaraderie, the collaboration, the audience response that you feel right off the bat. You don't, as an actor on screen, you don't get that unless you happen to be in the audience when watching your own film, which sure, I guess some of us might have that.
I do, believe me.
Yeah. Luckily, you get that opportunity, and not everybody will, to be in the, and it also depends on how big of a role that is. But
sure.
Yeah, I think that there's something to say about actually doing stage and being able to have that experience that you're not going to get. And so
it's funny because the unpredictability of live theater, I think, is what still scares me a little bit, because film, I feel, is a lot more forgiving in that you can edit something if it's wrong, or like you have a million chances. But like if it's that night on theater, whatever happens, that's it. And like I'm still not used to the fact that theater means that I'm never going to get to see just one, because when it's filmed, there's one performance, that's it.
Yeah,
But like there's a different person every time, and they each bring what they have to offer. And sometimes that's something good, sometimes not so much. And I'm still getting used to that. Like, oh man, like it's what I saw on this night is never going to be as good as what happened this night. And is it going to reflect poorly on me? No. I'm still kind of getting freaked out by that a little bit, but I'm learning to adapt.
Sure. No, well, a couple things. One, editing can make a performance. Mm-hmm. You can be the worst actor in the world, and the editor can make or break you. That's number one. Mm-hmm. You can be a great actor, and the editor could still, ruin you. That's number one. And let me give you something that I realized that might help you out in this regard, as far as being on stage. The audience doesn't know when something goes wrong. You know how it's supposed to go.
That's true.
The audience doesn't. Obviously, if a set piece falls over, or something like that, that may have been an accident. But at the same time, you get the opportunity to make it part of the action of the play, to perhaps, and the audience will love things like that. It's kind of like it's kind of like, and I don't know your experience, and for those of you that are listening or watching that might be on stage, you don't ignore it. You know what I mean? If something happens where something falls or something gets dropped, it's like the audience is like, there's that fork is on the ground. They dropped the fork on the ground. I wish somebody picked that up. Please pick that up. Whereas like now they're distracted. Now the focus is the fork. Not what's going on stage. So, so again, the audience doesn't know when something goes wrong. And, and I go off on a different subject or a tangent for a second, but, that's what I always tell people that are getting married. Don't worry about if what was supposed to happen doesn't happen, because your guests don't know that maybe there were supposed to be doves that flew away. And it's the same thing with theater. The audience doesn't know. So that's my 2 cents of advice for you is just run with it, roll with it. The audience doesn't know. That's the joy of it. So
yes,
and the joy of it as well is like, it's not going to be the same, but that's it's always ingrained in, not to mention there's evidence isn't the right word, but film is, for the most part, forever. There's a record of how it went.
That's true. For
the audience, the stage can be forgiving, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I guess so. It's like, if something embarrassing happens, I guess, you're never gonna. It's probably not gonna happen again. No one's gonna remember, and maybe they might.
And that audience member would have to come back multiple times to really be ingrained as far as like that one mishaps, like, or, whatever. That's my take on that for what it's worth. I think that there's something special about theater, How about, let me ask you this in that regard, because let's take it from it sounds like we're coming more from an acting approach, but from a playwriting approach. Have you found that there are moments that, or times when maybe it's a reading, maybe it's a performance that you like, oh, that didn't work. I need to fix that. How frequently, like you find that happens a lot, and like, how's that not editing? Yeah, I guess editing. Well, do things change? Do you realize once a performance is, like you said, there are different editions of 1 + 1 is 2. How many different editions are there outside of typos or something like that?
Oh, it's not like content stuff I had to fix. It was
Got it.
more,
Okay.
it was
Okay.
purely like, there's an extra letter or like
Okay.
there's a word missing. But no, it
But
wasn't the content that had to change. But I noticed like the plot hole in a recent play that I did that has only had a reading in New York. It's called Pomp and Circumstance, and that's
right.
a
Yep.
comedy. And
Okay.
what that's about is basically there's this girl who's she's like a recent college graduate. She went to culinary school, and she so what happened was she was supposed to she had an alumni survey there's her alma mater, her high school sent out asking like, hey, what are you doing after graduating 5 years on, da, da, da.
Right.
And she had lied and said that she owned her own cafe, which isn't true at all. She works at McDonald's and she doesn't even cook. She just like washes the dishes and the equipment when they're done. And and the thing is, the principal think it's a two-hander, there's only two characters, thinking that this was true, he called on her to replace the original commencement speaker because he had to get his appendix out in the middle of the night.
Mhm.
So her lie gets found out when like she has her McDonald's uniform in her bag and he's like smelling French fries in the air and he's like, oh, let me see your bag. And he searches her bag and they have a little physical tussle and the uniform falls out and he's like, oh, I didn't know you owned McDonald's, like in a sarcastic way. And then he catches her in her lie and she has to admit, I
Sure.
lied because I wanted to feel proud of myself for a moment because I really don't. And she's like, well, why don't you pick people like me to give the speech? You always pick like the Nepo babies, like the kids who go to Harvard, but like you don't pick the people who work 40 hours a week at menial jobs and they're working really hard. And actually, they're also doing stuff that matters too. And
Sure.
so finally he's like, she's like, well, now we have no speaker. She's like, well, why can't it be me? He's like, well, because you were dishonest. Like, I'm going to have to resign. She's like, no, please let me give the speech because I might never get to do this in my life. And then he's like, well, you either tell them the truth or you don't give the speech at all. And so then she finally gets on stage and she tells the truth. And it kind of turns into a whole thing where during her speech, she says like, why do we perpetuate this lie to children that you can be anything you want to be? Like from your first day of preschool, they say the world is your oyster and you can always have everything you want. And that's just not true. So the only plot hole I realized in it though, is that it says, she is a recent college grad, but somehow I think because I wrote this at like 3 a.m. when I was like blasted out of my mind on like no sleep, is that when she says, he asked her, do you even have any culinary experience? And she's like, well, no, I'm in culinary school right now. But I realized earlier I'd said she was a graduate. And I was like, oh no, like, I don't think anyone caught that because they enjoyed the play. But like, I had to go back and fix it. It was a really quick thing. But again, it only had a reading, not a full. And I could always go back and change that. But and also the other editing I had to do was with my my Glass Child play, which is that's about a girl who she lives with her mom, who's a widow. The dad died, and she lives with her mom and her brother, who's her disabled brother. And she's been like helping take care of the brother, ever since dad died, and probably long before then. She's kind of been like a third parent, and now she's faced with the choice of staying home for college in rural Idaho or going to Columbia. And basically, it's about her choice and how her mom loves her and wants her to do whatever she wants, but also would be left alone with the brother. So it kind of turns into a whole thing. And the content editing I had to do with that goes back to what I said with my teacher, who was like, you can't just have her say, oh, remember when I was a kid and you did this and you did that. Like a lot of the play was that.
Sure.
But I had to change it just in time. And I did. And the play was so much better for it.
Right.
And the more of the gripes that she had with her life were happening in the moment right now. Like, hey, right now I'm having a problem. Right now I'm feeling boxed in.
Sure.
It was not like when I was a kid, I was feeling boxed in. So, that's the only really, content changes I've had to make. And I have to do content changes sometime in my film scripts too. Like I have one, I'm making a dark comedy right now. It's about a medical condition that I have. It's like semi-autobiographical. It's a self-insert. And there's some things I had to change to make certain things more clear or make the passage of time more clear, or make, things about certain medications more clear for the audience who's going to be watching. And like, we can't mislead people when it comes to medicine and health. So yeah, I will have to go, but that's film and I can always improv. We haven't even shot those scenes yet, so it's fine.
Right.
But yeah, whenever there's a plot hole or something, it's not something really egregious, but still it should be clarified. Like if it were really egregious, I would have checked it. But it goes through certain rounds of editing and stuff like that. But
so basically but going back a little bit, the basic lesson is right in the present, not in the past.
Exactly. Yeah.
So two things that I want to ask, they kind of correlate with one another, but how does one get a reading at the Equity Library Theater? What was that like? How did you land that?
Sure. So I went on this, I think my membership is probably expired by now because I'm an alum, but it was on playwrightscenter.org. I think, what's the website? I believe it's Playwrights Center.
The one in Minneapolis?
Yes. Their website, and they have opportunities for members. And I used to have like a free membership through my school. I think it's done now, and I should renew it. And
it's very reasonable too. And the funny thing is their workshops, if you pay for the individual workshop without being a member, the money that you paid for the membership makes up for the fact that the workshop is more expensive, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Like hypothetically, it's $300 for the workshop, or it's $150 if you're not a member. But membership, you know what I mean? It's worth it just to do the membership than it is to just do the individual workshop.
Absolutely.
Anyways, and we'll send that link, and we'll put that link in the description, the show notes down below for anybody who is interested in the Playwright Center. Continue. I'm sorry, the opportunities that were there.
It's okay. It's so they basically had a bunch of opportunities, and I filtered it out by what was free, what didn't have a submission fee. And I saw Equity Library Theater and I submitted to them. And what Equity Library Theater is, for people who don't know, it's through the Manhattan Public Library. Okay. And they have readings every couple months or so. Sometimes the venue is at a library branch. Sometimes it's I believe the one they're doing in January is in a church, for example. And it's done through the library, and it's accessible to all. And it's I simply just submitted, and they're like, oh, very nice. And apparently it's pretty, it's like, I think Danny DeVito performed there at one point. I think Sidney Poitier did, or something like that. Okay. And it's pretty, I think, don't quote me, but I read that on Wikipedia, but it's really, and it was really nice. And it was I was supposed to go in August, but I got COVID. Like the week I was supposed to go, I got COVID, and I was cast in it. That was the thing.
No.
Yes, and I had no understudies, so I couldn't do it. But luckily, they were doing it again in October, and I just went for that. And I didn't want to cast myself again. I was like, no way. And even though my COVID immunity window was still in effect, it could, something else. I get hit by a bus, whatever. I just didn't want to be in it in case that happened. So I cast a couple of friends to do it, and I kind of work with them over Zoom. And it's kind of hard to direct over Zoom because I don't live in Boston, but so for blocking and stuff, they kind of had to get together and do it. And I'm going through this again with another production. I'm going to New York next week for Glass Child again in Pelham. So yeah.
What did you, from being in it originally and then not, but observing, what was that experience? What did you learn, or what did you notice, or did you find moments of like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that, being removed from it and watching somebody else do it?
I don't think I realized how I hadn't meant it to be dark and I love dark comedy. Sometimes I intend to write it and sometimes I don't. I intended this to be, because they asked us specifically for comedy only. They said, keep it light. And it's funny because there were a couple plays there that were clearly not a comedy at all. I was like, okay, that's weird. But anyway, they're good plays. They're just very much dramatic. And I was like, oh, these aren't, that's weird. They asked for comedy. But anyway,
that could come from direction as well. That's
what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So when I witnessed, and they did a good job. These are my friends, but I noticed there were a couple of lines I had instructed them to be more So it's funny, the actress who ended up playing my female lead was meant to play the principal originally, but we ended up swapping it out because we found someone who I thought just looked, was a lot older and more, suitable to play the principal. It was a guy, a friend of mine, but this this other character was this other friend of mine who she was like closer to my age, but she could kind of pass for, if she's a high school principal, maybe, she could look like she's early 30s or whatever. So that'd be fine. But I was originally playing the character because I had written her to be a more like neurotic type. And there were certain lines where I think the neuroticism maybe didn't, and that's just a personality thing. Like I'm naturally like, I call myself high voltage. Like I'm like this all the time. This is me. Like you could bottle this up. You could snort, you could snort my energy and you would get that. Like, that's the kind of what I wanted to bring to the play. Sure. I have to realize that maybe not everybody is like mentally, behaves like they're coked up all the time. So maybe it didn't translate the way, but it was like, for example, there were certain lines like with the McDonald's thing. Like there's a line where the principal goes, "Let me see your bag." And the line was her saying, like, "For what? I don't smoke weed that often anymore." And like, the line was supposed to be delivered like that, but it was delivered in a way that it wasn't as like, what? Like, that was funny thing. And I'm not saying she did a bad job. She did good.
No,
but I was
sure,
like,
of course.
Man, like, I wonder if it was clear that line was like meant to be funny about her smoking. But some of the lines did get laughs. And there's some lines that I weren't expecting to get laughs that got laughs. And I was happy about, like when he said, like the principal, he goes, "I used to be just like you. When I was in grad school, I used to work in fast food." And she goes, "McDonald's?" And he goes, "No, Burger King." And then she went like, like fighting, like with the rivalry. And that got laughs. And I was like, that was so funny. That was so good that she did that with her instinct. So there were things that like I would have done. There were things I necessarily wouldn't have done. But it's just funny how people got it. And when she was giving the speech, this is what I say, I didn't realize how dark it was when she's saying like, why do you perpetuate this fallacy that you can always be everything you want to be? The way some of the lines were, I think, being delivered, like, I think because she gave it as more of like a serious inspirational speech, people picked up on the darkness, like, this is an ugly truth of life. And the way I was going to deliver it was her like more like, "Hey, I'm nervous, and here's my speech, and I effed up, and here's what happened, and why do we perpetuate this fallacy?" It was going to be delivered more like stand-up comedy, the way I was doing it, and I think maybe my instinct may have been wrong. Now that I think of it, I think maybe the way the actress did it, it ended up being like a silly comedy, ended up turning into like a serious revelation about life that maybe might not be so great. And I think it translated. I think that the way she did it gave it more depth almost. It wasn't just silly and light anymore. It was really capitalizing on something that's important. So this is when I was removed from it. And I thought, maybe as an actor, maybe I should, if I ever get the gumption to, cast myself in it and not be afraid of getting COVID again, maybe I would go that route instead of what I was thinking. So I was glad. I'm satisfied with the job they did. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm a firm believer of completely removing yourself from your piece. And forgive me for those of you listening and watching again that I've told this anecdote. Like, so with Play Noir, I've had a couple of company members that have written things that have gotten in, and they said you can submit something, but there's two caveats. You can't direct it. You can't be in it.
Oh man, that's hard because I've had productions go really bad when I was not involved in it. Like you
can be involved. You can give. No,
I wasn't allowed to be at all, and it just.
Oh well, hang on here. Let's let this. This is going to be good for some listeners that may not be aware of this. So who was that through that you couldn't be involved? First of all, let me ask you that question. Who was this that told you couldn't be involved?
Well, it's not that they said I couldn't be involved per se. They just didn't reach out to me and say, "Do you want to watch this rehearsal? Do you want to vet?"
And what was the entity?
Oh God, I don't even know if I should say that. It was the.
If you don't. But so what's your school or anything?
I'm actually in a. I don't mind. I'm not even. Well, because I sounded off about I did something very stupid. I sounded off about the performance on Facebook, and I'm actually like the theater, like they got mad at me and they don't want me to submit anymore anyway. I guess it doesn't matter. It was the
No.
Canon Theater, and
Okay.
they're a community theater, and I get it. I guess maybe I was a little too harsh. Maybe see, I'm admitting that.
Sure.
Am I harsh? Not always.
No,
I mean,
no, you're not. And I think that there's something. Are you a member of the guild, of the Dramatists Guild?
I'm not. No.
Okay,
And
do yourself a favor and do that. Do that first of all, and then for yourself and for those listening or watching, familiarize yourself with the Playwrights Bill of Rights through the Dramatists Guild. You have the right to. Well, first of all, you own your work. You never gave up the rights to your work. Even people they're paying you royalties for it. They cannot change anything in your work. They cannot. You have the right to have a voice in casting. You can be there you have the right to be there for rehearsals. These are all things that are within your right. And
I didn't know that. No one ever told me that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I'm like, this is going to be beneficial for not just you, but for those listening that may not be familiar with it. So you don't even have to be a member to look at the Playwrights Bill of Rights. So you can go to the website. You can Google it. As a matter of fact, if you don't mind, I'm going to do this right now. If you guys don't mind,
no, I'm going to get my charger while you do that.
Yeah, do this.
And let me just quickly do that.
We won't unpack them.
Okay.
We will just kind of rattle them off real quick if everybody's okay with it. So, all right. It is essential that theater writers know their rights, which the Dramatists Guild has defended for over 100 years. Ownership of intellectual property. You own the copyright of your dramatic work. Authors in the theater business do not assign, i.e. give away or sell in entirety their copyrights, nor do they ever engage in work for hire. When a university producer or theater wants to mount a production of your play, you only license or lease the public performance rights to your dramatic property to that entity for a finite period of time. Ownership of incidental contributions. Again, we're not going to go through all these. I won't read them all, but you guys can go through and familiarize yourself with these. Subsidiary rights. You own the right to license your play into different markets. Future options. If a producer has presented your work for a significant run and you receive appropriate compensation, billing, and approvals, you may choose to grant option to the producer to present future productions. Compensation, royalties. You are entitled to receive a royalty when your work is produced. Billing credit. You should receive billing, i.e. typographical credit on all publicity, programs, and advertising distributed or authorized by the theater or producer. In process and production, artistic integrity. No one, producer, director, actors, designers, dramaturgs, can make additions, deletions, alterations, and or changes of any kind to your script, including the text, title, and stage directions without your prior written consent. Approval of production elements. You have the right to mutually approve with the producer, the cast, director, and designers, and for a musical, the choreographer, orchestrator, arranger, and musical director, including the replacements. This is called artistic approval. Right to be present. You always have the right to attend casting, rehearsals, previews, and performances. Author's contract. The only way to obtain all the rights listed above is through a written contract with the theater or producer, no matter how large or small the theater or the production may be. Implementation. We realize that making demands of a small theater is a difficult task. However, you should feel confident in presenting this Bill of Rights to an artistic director, producer, literary manager, or a university administrator as a starting point for discussion of your contract.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
There you go.
Yeah.
And again, you don't have to become a member, but the great thing is if you do become a member, they can help you with contracts. There's people available that can help you like, hey, this is my contract. This is what I just received. Can you review this with me? It's a great resource. I think it's maybe $89, $100 a year.
Okay. I mean, yeah, maybe if I do more theater, it'll become
sure,
more
100%.
But what happened here was like, and look, I mean, I felt really bad about. I felt like I was harsh looking back on it because I know
you had the right to present that.
Yeah. Well, what happened was basically, so this was like a community theater, and
Sure.
of course, actors are. These are people who maybe in their lives they do other things and they're like
Sure.
starting out. I think I set my expectations a little high. I don't think I really knew that. And like, the play is not a sad play by any means, even though it's like a serious subject matter. There's a lot of levity in there and a lot of heartwarming stuff, but these actors kind of turned into a tragedy, like a soap opera. I literally had an actress like crying and hyperventilating on stage when that was not supposed to happen. And it turned into like a complete, almost like, something that it was not supposed to be. And I got the sense that the audience lost some of the humor and some of the heartwarming things because there's an actress going like this on stage. And I was like, and I shouldn't have got, I guess I had the right to feel a certain way, but I didn't have to, go online and talk about it. And I know the post reached a lot of people and it hurt a lot of people's feelings. And I apologize to the actresses. I don't think, because we're not friends on social media, I don't think they saw it. Sometimes like on Instagram, a message can get buried or something, but I really felt bad about it. And I never want to be the reason why somebody stops doing something that they love. And when I thought about it that way, I felt really bad. And I said, I'm never going to do that again. Even if I see a performance that isn't great, I'm not going to do that or disparage. But it didn't sound like they got, and maybe it wasn't the actor's fault because it didn't sound like they got the best direction. Because I even asked after the fact and they said, oh, she just said, do it feels natural. I'm like, okay, that's not very, as a director, I'm very, I give a lot of notes, and it's not because I think actors are bad, because there's like something I really, really want to communicate and I want to make sure it's right. And like, again, like I don't have the opportunity to edit. It's not film. So I gotta be a little more perfectionistic. Yeah. So I think going forward, I would like to be involved more. I wish they had told me that was a possibility. But.
Well, it's like, look, you could be, could be a production across the country and you may not have the opportunity, but I think it's still important for the director to at least know the intention of the play and the intention of the playwright. So I wouldn't be too hard on yourself in that regard, but just be aware of what what your rights are. Yeah. One of the things, before we wrap up, and I said there was a correlation to, how does one get into the Equity Library Theater? How does one get an Amazon series from a full-length play?
It's pretty easy. I mean, once the adapting, like I said, there's a lot of changes I had to make, and I added.
The changes aside, it's not like I'm going to just grab my play and I'm going to send it to Amazon and they're going to say, hey, we like this. We're going to.
Oh no, so it doesn't work like that. It's
so how does it work? That's what I want to know.
Yeah,
the adaptation part, all that aside, I want to know how somebody gets the opportunity to have their stage play converted into again, not a movie, a series.
Well, I wrote each episode. I originally written 8, but like I had to put the cap at 5 because COVID happened, and all sorts of stuff like child actors aged out and people moved, and life happens. Actors had personal stuff going on in their lives, so I had to change a bunch of stuff.
Sure,
and then I did that, and then I'm going to tell you what I did. The process of getting something on Amazon is if you're not going through a distributor, which I've done before, and I didn't like it because like the problem with a distributor is like if not enough people are watching, they can take it off. But that doesn't happen when it's you. You sell. It's very much like self-publishing in that you upload the content.
Got it. Understood.
Poster, you put like a description.
So you're producing yourself.
Yes, and they have to vet it. Like I've tried to put things up there that they haven't allowed on the site. Sure. So they have to vet it and make sure it's the quality they want. You got to upload a caption file because that's required. Yep. You can do that on rev.com or something like that, or an SRT file. And then it like takes a few days usually, and it'll appear on the site. You get to choose like a royalties channel, like if it's available in Germany or the UK or something, you get to set the pricing. And that's pretty much how it works. It's not like they called me and said, hey,
I know I missed because I thought Amazon reached out because there's Amazon Studios here in LA. They took over part of the Culver Studios and they have the Amazon Studios there. I think they have like 3 sound stages there. Okay. All right. So you're self-producing and whatnot. All right, great. That's perfect. And so just the listeners are out there kind of like Amazon publishing there. You can get stuff on there. And as I mentioned, after we wrap this up, I'll give you a resource that you can look into as far as expanding that Gosh darn it. What's it called? Distribution.
Oh,
Distribution. Yeah.
Okay.
So on that note, question, where can people find your work?
You can find that on Amazon Prime. You can find, oh goodness, you can find some stuff on YouTube. You can find, I had a web series, for example, that was on that I put on IGTV back when Instagram TV was a thing.
Sure.
You can find that's called Sandbox Police web series. It's about a fictional podcast. It's a whole thing.
Okay.
You can find, for the movie I'm making right now called Nothing Solid, you can search Nothing Solid movie, just one word on Instagram. It'll be there. You see a picture of my face. You'll know it's me. You can find fiction on different places. You can find it at the Armenian Weekly, which is a newspaper that's read globally, but it's published here in Massachusetts, but everything's in English. Sure. I have a book of fiction that was also self-published called Floater, which is just previously published stuff that I put in a compilation. You can
What about
find
your stage?
that.
What about your stage work? Your stage plays? Can people find them if they wanted to find your stuff and produce it?
Well, Glass Child hasn't been published. It's just been in like festivals and stuff. You can reach out to me directly and I can give you the rights to it. My email is SZEROONIAN, just S Zeroonian. It's my first initial last name at gmail.com. You can reach out to me there. Reach out to me on my Instagram page too. It's at Mediterranean_homesick_blues. That's my username. You can find me there or just search Sharisse Zeroonian. I'm probably the only one on earth. You'll find me. And yeah, just, Google me. There's a lot of different channels. I'm not as active on Twitter as I used to be. I just kind of forgot about it. But you can find me there too.
Okay.
I'm basically everywhere. So
great. Awesome. Well, you wrapped, you got to my last question, which is, are you in the socials? And obviously you are. So that's great. And we got the website as well. So I'm glad we made this happen. Thank you for reaching out to set this up. And again, a very insightful, conversation. I think a lot of people are going to walk away with some great stuff. So,
okay.
Sharisse Zeroonian, thank you for coming on this episode of Playwright Spotlight.
Thank you, James.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this show with your friends. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.